Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the Doctor's Lab. Apologies for the slight late start. A lot to discuss behind the scenes and in front of the scenes, if you like. And I think that before I begin, I want to say greetings to our brother, my brother, Dr. Khalid Green. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How are
Hayyakum
you,
Allah.
brother?
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Everything's going well. Walhamdulillah.
Wa
Wa
alaikum
alaikum salam wa
salam.
rahmatullahi wa
Patience
barakatuh.
is coming there,
Wa
and
alaikum
Rehan.
salam.
Wa alaikum salam to Allah. I'm
Wa
Aya.
alaikum
Wa
salam.
alaikum salam rahmatullah. And enough Queen of Jordan again. Wa alaikum salam, my sister. Hind. Wa alaikum salam. Many
Yeah.
of you there. Jazakallah
Yeah.
khair.
I think
Wa
we'll
alaikum
just
salam
give
to
one big assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Otherwise, the whole show will
Alhamdulillah.
be giving salams. May Allah preserve
MashaAllah.
us all.
Ameen.
Ameen.
Ameen. And Jazakallah khair, patience. Today, Khalid, we've been looking at two sides of extremism, and that a lot of our studies, our PhDs, focused on violent extremism, but we did speak about liberal extremism, progressiveness, the liberalism that we're witnessing amongst Muslims and wider society today. And I think it's a good point to come to, that we speak about, is there a balanced perspective and position that we can maintain as Muslims within the societal environments that we live in today, particularly coming from the West. And that balanced perspective is indeed one that Muslims should be adhering to in any time or age, as it were. So one of the things, wa alaikum salam, Sister Nadia, one of the things that I was looking at in my PhD studies was that was about emotional register. And what do I mean about that? I looked at that as a British Muslim identity construct. And to kick this off, I want to read a bit about what was said by some academics. And why am I bringing this? Because when we see, as we've seen since 9/11, especially since 9/11, when a terrorist attack or incident comes about, there's always this expectation from wider society for Muslims to take a position. And why aren't Muslims condemning? Why aren't Muslims standing beside the non-Muslim society and holding their hands in condemning this atrocity, as we saw very recently with what has happened in France? And the fact of the matter is that there've always been elements amongst the Muslim community, even if the wider Muslim community is kept silent because of fear or whatever, that have been enjoining good, forbidding evil, condemning acts of extremism, wherever it may be, whatever it may look like. And what we actually see here, one of the academics mentioned that by tracing how shame is evoked, rejected, and projected onto particular subjects, this individual traced how identity is linked to the process of identity formation, not only of self, but also of other within the national collective. So there's an element of shaming that goes on, and then you'll see that minority communities, because of that shaming or that feeling of ashamed, they then feel that projection upon them, and they then start saying, we're not with the terrorists, we're against this, Islam is a religion of peace. They're not doing it by virtue of the faith itself, by and large. They're doing it because of what's being projected on them. They are now the other. They are now the marginalized. And so therefore they feel this need to come out defensively, or in some cases, as we mentioned previously, become insular, become inward looking, withdrawing from society in that particular instance. So I want us to talk about that, because in that there are various factors at play. And I'll come to the point. So we know, for example, Salafis are looked on as apolitical. And in that, there are some advantages. But I would say, and you may disagree with me, and this is where we will discuss, inshallah, there are disadvantages on occasions within the societal context of being apolitical. Now, I'm not going down the road to say for a moment we should become like the Muslim Brotherhood, Ikhwani, and this Salafi politico terminology that's placed around us. But there is a time when we do need to speak, and it might be within the realms of political discussion, political discourse. So I'll hand over to you at this point, and then we can continue now that I've put the cat amongst the pigeons.
Yeah, inshallah ta'ala. So you've opened up quite a bit of a huge can of worms, so to speak, you know. What I would say regarding the last point that you mentioned is that when we look at the deen in and of itself and dawah to Salafiyah, a lot of those elements are already there. You know, there's already what is known as siyasat al-shar'iyyah. You know, I believe it's a book by Sheikh al-Islam, or Ibn al-Qayyim wrote a book called Siyasat al-Shar'iyyah. And there's also some earlier books written by many scholars about leadership, about, you know, and roles of Islamic politics, if you will. Mm-hmm. So what I would say is those elements are there. It's kind of like when the Sufis, I've had a lot of extreme, you know, people who are into maybe grave worship or various practices. They want to seek refuge from the dead. And anyhow, they say, you guys have no mysticism. Mysticism is real Islam, the Sufi path. And I say, well, you know, not necessarily mysticism, but these elements, the element of reflecting on yourself and fighting your nafs and things like this, that's already implicit in the religion. So I don't think we have to look outside, but it's really the practical implications of when we're in a particular situation. For example, the knife, the stabbing in, or the beheading in France, you know, that's when you're going to see how it's manifested. But the elements of how to deal with things, the tools are already there. The framework is there. And basically, as long as you don't go outside of the framework of Islam in dealing with whatever your situation that comes up, whatever threat there is, then inshallah ta'ala, you're okay, bidnillah ta'ala. I don't know if that was kind of on a line with what you were saying, or answering that kind of what you left out there. Another point I want to mention, you mentioned about the responses. You know, the responses when we have these various these extremist attacks, especially in the West. Okay, especially in the West, and if it involves a Muslim or not. It was interesting. Even just recently, a close family member said, you know, about because then within the following days, the shooting in Vienna, yeah, and so before the incident had finished, actually a close relative who's non-Muslim said, yeah, well, you know, something Muslim, you know, it's already in the air. And I was thinking, you know, we're hoping that it wasn't a Muslim, but the you know, it's out there. It's out there. Mm-hmm. A last point with regards to what you're saying, those responses. So no doubt the greater society, they're looking for answers. So they're like, hey, why is this guy got a turban? Why is it every time we see these shootings, even though they ignore the other things going on in their society? For example, in America specifically, you find more terrorist attacks from white nationalists and white supremacist groups. You know, that's well known. If we look at data, we look at hard data, there's no comparison, comparison. But and the level of violence, but the focal point is on Muslims. So I'll turn it back over to you, because I was going to talk about those different positions as well. You know, maybe the Salafi reaction, the Takfiri response, and the liberal or Takfiri extremists, whatever you want to say. Right. How they kind of...
Alhamdulillah, I think we're going to be able to speak to that. Yeah. And Sister Salwa, wa alaikum salam, and to the others who've just come on, wa alaikum salam to Allah. I think that, yes, we do have to return to Quran and Sunnah. That's why we're talking about maintaining a balance. But the issue is that not everyone does return to the Quran and Sunnah in these instances. That's why we have these polarizations. And before we move on to, as you said, the Salafi response or non-response it may be in these particular instances, talking about emotional register, as I said, as an identity construct, I looked at some categorizations that emerged following the 7/7 attacks in London. And the first one, and I want to read out to you, and I mentioned here, following these events, possibly 3 categories of emotional register were witnessed amongst the Muslim community. In that, 1, it collectively joined with the rest of the nation in condemning the attacks and sharing its sense of grief, guilt, and shame at the fact that the perpetrators were British born and raised Muslims. Two, some members of the community initially remained silent, feeling that such an expression, or indeed admission of guilt and shame, could result in a national expression of anger, followed by a violent backlash against Muslims from the predominantly non-Muslim society. They could, in effect, be considered politically passive. And the third category that I said emerged was others, particularly the youth amongst the community, emphasized their solidarity with the global Muslim ummah and anger against the foreign policy of the UK and its allies. So these were the three categorizations that I saw emerge in that particular instance. Some wanted to bury their head in the sand, others saying we must grieve and come out with the non-Muslim community because we are part of them and we're ashamed of what's actually happened. And then the third ones that will say, no, we're not going to do that. We're angry that this has resulted in foreign policy against Muslims and the like. And I think that if we look at those three categorizations, many of us will feel that the third one is where sympathy or empathy could be misconstrued for support of extremism. And the first category, that passivity, as it were, could be looked at as the elders, traditionals, and the liberal elements, the progressive elements of the community wanting to posit themselves and be safe, as it were, in inverted commas. Now, can we say that in all of those that a balance was being maintained? I'm not sure. I didn't look at that in the context of my PhD in this particular chapter that I was looking at. But again, now we saw various positions from Salafis, the most united one coming out publicly and condemning extremism, which is that's the norm, that's standard, that's what should be the minimal requirement from those who adhere to a balanced position in the deen, or claim to be adhering to a balanced position in the deen. But the point that I made earlier on, Khalid, where I believe that some criticism can be leveled against us, is when there's this unearthly silence to these attacks. And not only these attacks, the conversations that need to continue after them. Okay? It's as though we come out, we speak, then we go back silent again. And then when other things are taking place, there's an absence of that voice that professes to be in the middle, our voices. And we only have to go back to not just the terrorist incidents that we're speaking about. Let's talk about George Floyd and the arguments that emanated from there, because you have individuals saying there shouldn't be any protesting. And I don't think anyone was saying that we should go out and protest. But what the argument was that we should raise our voices in solidarity with those who were arguing and saying Black Lives Matter, the cause, not Black Lives Matter, the movement, but Black Lives Matter, the cause. There was a lot of disagreement amongst, you could say, the Salafi community in condemning each other. Some were bringing fatwas from the shuyukh that were saying, yes, you can protest, and others would say, no, you cannot. And the issue wasn't protesting, it was standing up for justice, which we should do as Muslims, whether it's for us or it's for those who are not Muslim, but they're being oppressed in that particular instance. And this is problematic, because what we've got now, let's look at what's happening now. I'm not saying we should be involved in the political climate in the US at the moment, and my sympathy goes out to you. Your country's a mess. Your country's more like a developing country, like somewhere in the South Americas or one of these developing countries. It's no longer a first world country. We've got a president who's refusing to move and everything like that. And we saw this in other countries in further afield. So my thing is now, that voice, that balanced voice, that voice of moderation. Why is it that we're not always in that space and willfully withdraw? And on the basis of saying it's from the Sunnah. And in some instances, in many instances, it is. But surely there's another side to that when the voices need to be there within a Western context.
I think again, I didn't really touch so much on exploring these topics, this is almost kind of where my research dropped off. And some of the things that I concluded, because I said, these are areas for further research, is basically what role do Salafis have in a Western society? We're here, and these are kind of new dynamics with large Muslim populations migrating to non-Muslim lands, and all of the other, finding our place and what we should be doing. Is it hijrah? Is it this? Is it that? So I think there's some tensions there, and it's unpacking those tensions. So I think it's really about that we are a developing community, not just Salafis. I'm talking about Muslims in the West, are a somewhat new minority in that sense, as far as practicing Islam and Sunni Islam in a loose sense of the word Sunni, and that we're finding our place, and so we have different representations from those various groups. We know Ikhwan Muslimin and some of the other groups, and the progressives want to assimilate. Ikhwan Muslimin wants a political voice. Salafis find themselves trying to practice their religion to the best of their ability, in theory, somewhat insular from the society, withdrawing. No, I can't take that type of work because it's haram. No, this, no, they've kind of built their own community similar to, although it may not be thriving in the same way as the Amish that we have in America. Some of those communities that have withdrawn, they maintain their lifestyle, their lifestyle and their belief system and so forth, and they don't necessarily integrate in the greater society. They have their way in their community. So I think a lot of this tension is because we're all trying to find our place and our space in a secular society or in a non-Muslim society, and as a non-Muslim minority. So even our reactions to these extremist events and so forth are diverse for that reason. And so one thing I was going to mention here, for example, as you said, Salafis having that tendency to be apolitical because they have a whole different constructs, that we're focusing on. Tawheed, and, hopefully reforming the self and so forth. The Messiah, the issues that we're thinking about are even kind of different, but everyone is confronted when Muslims are being persecuted in the West or whatever the case may be. There are common causes, but the focus is different on how to react. So Salafis can sometimes be indifferent. They seek to kind of distance themselves from those actions, those extremist actions, and the ideologues. But as you said, it doesn't seem that they afterwards that it's a continuum. But I would say, as my research argues, they're the most effective and the most vocal in dealing with these issues, whereas other communities, they often don't. They just renounce Salafis and others and put them all into one package as extremists, Wahhabis or whatever, and condemning them and saying, hey, we're not like them. And then they rush to the other extreme. We are a part of the society. We're running for Congress. We're going to have interfaith worship services. We're going to, they go to that other extreme. Those are the progressives, and then you have in between, you probably have, as you said, those Ikhwani type groups and so forth. And then you have those extremists themselves, the youth who are affected, who say, why are you worried about, like, I remember some of the comments with the Black Lives Matter, some guys, why are you guys even worried about these disbelievers? They're killing each other. So what? These were the kind of comments. He was an African-American as well as a Muslim, but so he couldn't relate to that struggle from another perspective. But what you find from those more who lean towards that extremism is some of them, of course, they praise those kinds of actions. When September 11th came, Abu Hamza, he said there was no, and it was in the Independent or one of the newspapers, the Guardian or something, and he said, there wasn't a Muslim who could not have been happy when the planes hit. The only one who wasn't happy was a hypocrite. This is Abu Hamza. So those extremists, right, they praise those actions. They praise the attackers. ISIS would easily take the credit for this guy beheading, saying one of our young soldiers in France did his honorable job defending the honor of the prophet while all the hypocrites were silent. You know, this is how they form the narrative. This is how they and they praise the ideologies and they praise the ideologues, you know, or the actors of those extremist things, you know, and so much. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's you're very, very to the point on that, and I agree with you on that. That's what the extremists on that side of the fence do, and as you so well articulated, the progressives, when they jump into the other extreme after marginalizing those who are most balanced with their articulation against extremism, then they move to the other end, the liberal progressive extreme in that instance. But one thing you highlighted, I think that's very important to address regarding the comparison with the Amish. And the difference is with the Amish, and we see some of these Orthodox Jewish communities.
Excuse me, sorry to interrupt. The American pronunciation is more appropriate, Amish.
Sorry,
I'm just messing with you. I just had to get you. You know, I live in the box with my brothers from.
Maybe I've got it wrong anyway. Amish. We're calling it the Amish.
But you know go ahead. Remember, I might be wrong too, but yeah.
But I'll have a little joke with you there. Remember, you gentlemen in that side of the waters, you learn your English from us. So just remember that. Let's and the pronunciation. So
we had a good bid'ah with that. A good bid'ah. But go ahead.
No, anyway, with the Amish, let's look at the comparison that you gave. I think it's very important. When we look at them and we look at the Orthodox Jewish communities and we see the insularity around them, there's a stark difference compared to what we see happening amongst a few of the, I would say, urban Salafi communities. And that is that through insularity of our own communities, we ghettoize them. And that's a problem. Because that ghettoization makes us, not in totality, but in part, that ghettoization then becomes a mindset generationally. And you'll see that there are limitations with regards to what type of participation, what sort of qualifications can be achieved and attained in the societies that we live. And that's problematic from a Dawah perspective, those looking inwardly. It's a problematic from an economic perspective. It's problematic from a developmental perspective for the next generations that are coming about. And then the problem is exacerbated when the excuse is given that this is from piety that this is being done. Now, the statement of, okay, maintaining the halal and not wanting to mix in society and everything like that. Now, this is an oxymoron. To an extent. Why? Because of a key point that you've mentioned, that we are living in an era that wasn't seen previously in the annals of Muslim history. Okay, one, we're living without the umbrella of a Muslim Khilafah, the Islamic State, not what we saw extreme,
a unified
Khilafah,
unified leadership.
Ottoman Empire. Yeah, even though the Ottoman Empire had these problems in that instance. So there's not that. Also, the other unique circumstances that we find ourselves in is that you've never seen, and a student of knowledge discussed this with me many years ago when I was sitting with him in Jeddah, mashallah. I'm a graduate from Medina. We have not seen that Muslims in such a large number living as minorities in non-Muslim societies.
Yes.
So you speaking about the various groups finding their ways and everything is a very accurate and poignant reality that we're facing. However, the point is then, in view of these new challenges that are emerging, I'm going to pose a question there. And I'm not saying that we throw the baby out with the bathwater, and I'm not saying that we disconnect and divorce ourselves, like some say, from scholasticism from the Middle East or from the African continent or the Indo-Pac subcontinent. But isn't there then a case which some are arguing, and we have some scholars among ourselves, I'd say bona fide, who've emerged, like Sheikh Tahir Wyatt, as considered by a few in the Arab world. What do we then do to deal with these new challenges? Do we continue, as we have been doing, to speak to our ulama and get from them contexts that they are unfamiliar with? Not on the whole, but in part. Or do we need to start bringing more to them, a wider contextualization of what's actually happening and how to navigate that in the context of us living as minorities, such large minorities, such diverse Muslim minorities in a non-Muslim environment. Like, for example, and I'll put it back to you on this point, so many, walaikum salam, Jordan, and Sister Kira, who said salams earlier on, and a few of them, mashallah. We see that, for example, many Muslims voted. I was looking briefly on the news today that many Muslims voted for Biden. So the whole issue of voting, the efficacy of voting. Then we'll have those who have never voted, and as Muslims, and even when they weren't Muslims, never voting, and their position of not voting. And I'm not speaking to either a case now. I'm just saying now, in the context of what we're living, where is the balance in this? What is the way forward in maintaining a balance as a minority in the West?
Yeah. So I think, again, you brought up so many things. I had to jot down a couple just to keep on track myself. So one of the things, I think when you mention about ghettoized externally, okay, or I'm sorry, they are ghettoized, maybe ghettoized from themselves. They've ghettoized themselves more or less. I think there's also the external factor too, and there's a lot of issues that contribute to that ghettoization, if you will, because you probably find the same in Sweden or in the European countries too, of those kind of, and France, a lot of the Salafis there, they have that tendency because of their wanting to withdraw from society, kind of, maybe they live there. Not all of them even want to make hijrah or anything, but it's kind of their tendency, it's their understanding of al-wala wal-bara, loving and disdaining for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and all of those other elements that come into play. That's how they're looking at it. But with regards to the scholarship, there's no doubt we need scholarship in the West. We need major scholars, we need organization, we need organized leadership. We need people to take care of our affairs in that sense. But in the absence of that, I mean, what I would say, okay, mashallah, we have mashayikh, of course, in the UK and in America, in France, I'm sure, all of those in the West. And also we can't forget the East, because a lot of the East are non-Muslim societies where they're Muslim minorities as well. And I'm sure they have some people who are graduates and what have you. And so the label of scholarship is relative, Now, I'm not saying I don't believe we have people in America on the level of a lot of our even younger mashayikh in Saudi Arabia or Yemen. No, I just don't see that. And I've met some very knowledgeable mashayikh here, but you don't know. That's just my limited experience. We may have some that are high powered like that, but for the most part, we don't have that kind of the level of knowledge out there to be able, to reach that level of that type of ijtihadat and looking at these masail. Another point is, as you mentioned, that those mashayikh, maybe mashayikh in Saudi Arabia, they don't know what the day-to-day living is in America or in the mashayikh in Yemen or what have you. However, what is very, very important, and this is anytime there's fatwa and seeking knowledge for anyone, a beautiful principle is a hukm ala shay farran ala tasawwurihi, which means a part of making a ruling on something is that you have a correct picture of it. So, for example, I believe in the situation, I was reading a beautiful fatwa, and Sheikh Tahir mentioned this, but I read this prior. There's a beautiful volume of Sheikh bin Uthaymeen. It's called Fatwa for Muslim Minorities. Okay, and I don't know if there's if any of it's in English. I'm not sure, but the Arabic anyway. I found things I had never known, and he was talking about the issue of protesting. I was just blown away. Some Palestinian brothers in America asked and said, "Hey, Sheikh, we have this and this and this," and so he mentioned the distinction between being in a Muslim land and in a non-Muslim land. My point is, related to that principle I brought up, is that the scholars have to be given a good tasawwur, a good image. Okay, they have to, a good picture, a complete picture of what is being discussed. So if we say Sheikh, for example, Sheikh Wasiullah Abbas, Imam al-Albani, many imams that said out of a necessity, voting for the lesser of the two evils, okay? You know, they are given a good tasawwur, meaning people from that land have come to them and told them about the ins and the outs. In our society, it's like this. Sheikh, we have this, we have this. Obviously, it's better if we have people on the ground who are from that community. But in the absence of that, with that level of knowledge is what I'm saying. These high-powered levels of knowledge, we need them. So a part of that is giving them the correct picture of what's going on the ground. Sheikh, we are, you know, as you see, I'm an African-American sheikh. I mean, I'm an African-American. I'm not saying I'm a sheikh, but I'm talking to the sheikh. This is like a hiwar here. So I'm saying, sheikh, you know, my people have been oppressed, blah, 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 blah. This is what has happened, sheikh. Yeah, what is my position as a Salafi? You know, my son may get pulled over. Sheikh, I may get pulled over. Sheikh, people are coming to me threatening my life, Sheikh. Should I strap in? You know, bottom line is you have to be able to give the Sheikh a correct picture of the angles and how to look at that image. And he makes his fatwa based on that. He says, oh, I see. Oh, really? You guys have this problem. Oh, and it's a traditional problem. Ah, yes, I've read about this. I've understood this. Yeah, so in that case, so part of making a ruling is having a correct picture. And then we also see a lot of fitna that is arisen because the correct image was not given. What is the classic example? How many times have students in the UK, in America, in France, destroyed the image of another person from Ahlul Sunnah because they had the ear of Sheikh so-and-so. Sheikh so-and-so's doing this. He's with the Hizbis. He's doing this. So they form the picture. The Sheikh, he's now in a corner. He says, well, yeah, then he's a Hizbi. No, he shouldn't. He's Dal Mudil. He is misguided and he misguides the others. That's because the picture and the image and the details and the surrounding circumstances presented to him, he's making a hukum based on that. Hopefully I didn't get too far off.
No, I think
this coffee is dangerous.
No, Khalid, I think that's excellent because some of the questions that have been raised and points being made by the participants, the viewers, are excellent. Like the statement that a corridor needs to be made between us and the scholars because there's almost an ambivalence, perception of ambivalence from them towards us. And while I would say in some elements, I believe that's true. In other elements, as you said, they're not getting the full picture. And I think that we do need to have that connection with the scholars. Let's not have any shadow of a doubt about that. And Allah tells us that in Surah Ali Imran, and those that are most knowledgeable about the deen, about Allah, are the ulama. And we've got individuals, extremists on both sides, the liberals and the religious extremists, the violent extremists, trying to diminish the position of the scholars. And that's very, very important in this instance. However, the context does need to be given to scholars. The right questions need to be given to scholars so that they can answer. But at the same time, there shouldn't be a paralysis. One of the things I maybe was part of when I was in first on the deen was this paralysis not to move or to act on things that we knew the answers to from a pragmatic and practical context because we wanted to hear what a scholar had to say. And what the scholar had to say sometimes was misrepresented and it wasn't relevant to the context and the society that we were living in. So when we're seeing the fatwa, and I will put this out there, you may disagree, like we know that free mixing, and the understanding of free mixing needs to be there. Okay, free mixing, flirting, fraternization, partying, and all that is not permissible. But then when that's taken to a wider construct and given to the scholars, so you then end up having ghettoization because brothers and sisters say, we are not going to work. We live in a Western society, and we know that working alongside the opposite sex is prevalent. We know that traveling is not segregated and such like. So when you then get a fatwa that is given to you from a really restricted prism paradigm, okay, and then you've got those who are more overzealous, and depending on what stage of their cognitive development they're on, they then say it's haram for you to do haram, but it's okay to take state benefits. And as someone mentioned before, one of the participants highlighted about the socio-economics that we need to become more socio-economically grounded. This is a very, very true point. But again, that's what it comes back to. Those of us who profess to be within the balanced middle perspective. That's ideologically, that's theologically, but that's not socio-economically. That's not socio-politically. And I want to make that, I need to make that point clear. You may disagree with me. So let's be clear. When we're talking about maintaining the balanced perspective, we're not only talking about the ideological perspective. We're not only talking about the theological perspective, adherence to the Sunnah, because I will challenge anyone to say that Salafis are not in that balanced perspective. But now we cannot hold up the same claim socio-economically, socio-politically, socio-educationally, and I'm talking academic education as well. There are issues there. We are not in that balanced perspective because of some of the understandings we have theologically or socio-religiously places us in a marginalized perspective. I'm not going to say extreme, maybe behaviorally extreme, some would say, but from according to my definition of behavioral extremism, but from a marginalization, it's self-inflicted from the socio-economic, socio-political perspective. We are not maintaining the balance in that particular instance. So what you've said, you said some really interesting points which hold a lot of weight and a lot of validity. And I think that now, as one of the sisters mentioned, Sister Kira was mentioned about finding that balance, adhering to the Sunnah, being a Muslim within the context of society today, understanding some of the religious edicts within the context of which we're living in today is very, very important. But one of the things that we can be clear on while we're working out or navigating through this very new, still relatively new environment, living as minorities, large minorities in the West, is that we know which polarizations not to move towards. The two polar extremes, we have certainty that we should not move either left or right to the violent takfiri Khariji extremism, or that liberal extreme, that progressiveness where things are watered down to the extent to almost non-existence, just so that we can coexist or assimilate into the Western society. While we're navigating in this very wide middle ground, those two polar opposites are no-go areas at all times.
MashaAllah, tabaraka wa ta'ala. Naam. Yeah, you said you gave it a lot of fruit there. You just offered a whole bunch of fruit. SubhanAllah. I think that again, this is a part of that tension that we are feeling and learning to navigate, because it's learning about our position in the society, you know, and what our role is, and to what extent we can participate, and what extent, and the things that we should refrain from. So it's a very, you know, I don't know what to add to that, except that, you know, it's something, it's new. And one thing we do have to keep in mind, I going back to the point that you made in the beginning about being the paralysis, you know, waiting for the sheikh. There are things that we will have to make moves on, you know what I mean, in the context of our society. And in relation to that, we do have, alhamdulillah, we do have students and we do have mashayikh that know how to navigate our society, meaning in those societies. Because, for example, the students who come from the Islamic universities, the scholars do not, I mean, those students, when they graduate, they are expected to be kind of emissaries of the dawah. The mashayikh are teaching them tools, teaching them knowledge and so forth, and the understanding, so that way they can be emissaries and go back to their societies and apply those tools, but not to be extensions of those scholars. That's not what the role is. And I've heard mashayikh like Sheikh Ibrahim Raheli mention this, that, basically they're graduating their mashayikh in the context of their society, you know? So you're going there to get tools. You're not going there, you know, if you're a graduate from Kulliyat Hadith, your role is not to go back to America or the UK and just be a translator. You know what I mean? No. You have a much greater responsibility and a role in And then those things which you don't know, you can refer back to those who know. You know, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ask the people of knowledge if you don't know. Okay, so they have a role to navigate in these societies and deal with the contemporary issues. Another point I want to mention with that is that the scholars themselves, this is one of the things you see, especially with the major scholars, like the Kibar ulama in Saudi, you know, the Lejna. And people, even the youth there, Saudi youth and others, become frustrated with them. But when you study their path and you see in the larger picture, you see the ilm and the fiqh and the wisdom of those imams. The reason I say that, for example, this is really actually what literally I experienced. When September 11th happened, that was the only time I had the chance. I met Sheikh Salih bin Fawzan. Okay, he came to my college that I was teaching. I was in Hayal, and he came for like a day lecture, and then he came to the Jaliyat, you know, because I was very active in doing dawah with the Jaliyat as well. So then we got to meet him there. So because I was the only American Muslim there in the college, especially in Hayal, especially back in those days. So they brought me to Sheikh Salih bin Fawzan. But I remember I asked the question because I was like, Sheikh, because a lot of my students, everyone had all these opinions about September 11th. And I was like, Salafi and just like, this is evil and look at the wickedness in the lives and stuff and so forth. And I presented the question to Sheikh Salih bin Fawzan, and I didn't get the answer I expected. That's because the dust hadn't settled. Those imams, they make darasa of issues. And although we want answers quick, we want to operate, what should we do? France just had the beheading. We need this, we need to, we want a reaction, and it's according to our opinion, what we feel good or what's safest for us in that country. But the imams of the Sunnah, those great scholars, they make darasa. They look at these issues because they're giving you a hukm shari. They're giving you a sharia-based answer, and it's not a knee-jerk thing. And even a lot of Saudi youth would get frustrated. Is it jihad in Iraq? We want to go, because they were going to Iraq like crazy, especially the tribes were, from where I was living, Shemr, there was a lot in Iraq. So they were tied to them on every way. They wanted to go, and they wanted also because they were tribal affiliated. And so they would get frustrated. How come those major scholars don't speak? How come they're not giving us the answers now? And I remember my Sheikh Saeed, he said, because they make darasa. They're not knee-jerk. They're not,
What's darasa? What does darasa?
That they study the issue. They study these masail. They look into them. They don't just run and rush and quickly, give an answer that's just going to make you feel good. Yeah, go. And then look at all the facade that comes. Instead, they look at those masail. They make, they come together. They have shura. So they're implementing those principles. That's one thing we need, is the lack of istijal, of being in a hurry about things. And there's sometimes we have a precedence, as you said. Sometimes we do have to make moves. But again, we're not making moves totally, hopefully, in blindness. We have a lot of students in knowledge, a lot of graduates, a lot of people who are mashayikh in our societies who can help us deal with some of the, which you almost think are common sense or issues that, they're kind of recurring in a sense. It doesn't take much for us to denounce when we see an evil action like that. But the problem is that lack of a program on how to be dealing with that, on a permanent basis. The education, the laying the pillars down. And I know this is definitely a part of your experience and knowledge, where you have knowledge and direct experience in that, and that need for that, because when I look at where I'm from here in Seattle, Washington, it's predominantly immigrant communities. They don't want to even talk about those issues. They're like on a whole nother planet. Even the ones that are Salafi, they don't even, they have no clue. It's just something will happen. Like when Shabab came in Somalia, with huge Somali population here, Somali youth, some of them they're going there. Those guys aren't even dealing with that. Me, I'm not even from there. I'm occasionally on the minbar, I might say, no, don't join these groups and this and that and the other. But there's no effort. It's only when an event happens, there's a reaction. So that's the stage that we're at in general in these societies, is a reactionary state. So much to say.
Yeah, no, mashallah.
Yeah.
Just a quick, one of them asked about sheikh and scholar. Are they synonymous? In some instances, they are. That can be clarified, but not every sheikh is a scholar in that particular instance. If you're looking,
there could be a sheikh by age, or he could be a sheikh of a tribe. You know, as far as in the Arabic linguistically.
That's right. But then also, one of the Salafi participants mentioned something as well, conceding that some fatwa are political. And that is a reality that is there when we see, if we're looking on a micro level and we see some of the disputes between our Sheikh, and as you've mentioned, Sheikh Ibrahim al-Ruhaili said that the student who's graduated is not to come back and basically to translate or to be an extension of the Sheikh in that particular instance. But we do see that, unfortunately, we see some come back and they are just representatives of either political positions or religious positions of particular scholars, and then you see this split taking place. So there is an element of truth in that regarding political aspects of some of the fatwa that may come. I'm talking at
someone just mentioned
level.
Yeah, someone just mentioned about waiting for this, not having to wait for, such as boycotting France. We don't need to wait for what the UAE foreign minister says for us to hold our position.
Yeah,
is this what you're talking about? Yeah. Can I address that? Can I let me
you can.
I just want to chime in really quickly. So there's a couple of things going on here. For one, you're not under the UAE. Okay. So yeah, as far as waiting for their position, I'm not under Saudi Arabia. I love Saudi Arabia. I love the lands of the Muslims and my scholars. But again, I'm in the United States of America, and the United States of America is different than the UK, which is different than Sweden, which is different than France in the things that they're dealing with. So since we basically have an absence in our context of leadership, you know, I'm in America. I don't really say I have Muslim leaders. There's imams of masajid, but there's nothing. You know, we don't feel the tie, and whatever Ikna and Isna, I don't feel they represent me at all. They're like totally Akhwana Muslimin, progressive, relative, organizations. I'm a Salafi, and unfortunately, we have no leadership in that sense. So, of course, I'm going to look at these issues and what's aslah, what is, more rectifying for my situation. But what I do want to distinguish here is the fact that the UAE or Saudi Arabia, the people in those countries, Islamically should be with their leadership. So someone living in the UAE should not be going against whoever the leader is, Sheikh Zayed, because he is the leader of that society. He is the Muslim ruler of that society. Regardless of what you think about him, he is the Muslim ruler. And if we go back to what our beloved Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, "As-sam'i wa ta'ala mari al-muslim fima yuhibbu wa kariha. Ma lam yu'miru bi ma'siyatin fi idha umira bi ma'siyatin fala sam'a wa la ta'a." The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, hearing and obeying the Muslim ruler in that which you love and dislike, as long as he does not command you to do disobedience to Allah. And if he commands you to do disobedience to Allah, then there is no hearing and there's no obeying, meaning in that command. So that is a right that the Muslim ruler has, even in issues that are not defined in the Sharia. For example, the traffic light system or these issues of boycotting France or whatever. So if the ruler says in that society, for that society, because he's a ruler of that society, his jurisdiction is not over Saudi Arabia, it's not over Kuwait, it's not over Yemen or Gambia, but that is binding upon his constituency. Okay, so it's very important that we don't throw it away and say, well, Sheikh so-and-so in Kuwait said, Sheikh so-and-so in whatever said, that is relative to their society and they have Muslim leadership. We are living in a non-Muslim context, a non-Muslim leadership context. You're in the, you're not in the UK, but you're from the UK. But if you were in the UK, I mean, you're not bound by that.
And this is a very important point, Khalid, because what we see, unfortunately, from amongst our cohort, Salafis, us, is that some of us make it binding, those positions binding. So we've spoken previously, you have those who are Saudi-centric, and whatever's coming out of Saudi, they're saying must apply in the UK and America, and they judge you in the UK, America, the West according. Some may be Yemen centric, and we've seen the split that took place between the Salafis, who was Yemen centric, and Saudi centric, and this is incorrect to bring that and transpose those positions into a Western context and cause division or judge others according to that. So I think, and then we have the flip side as well, where we go back to the Salman Rushdie affair in 1989. It wasn't even anyone from Ahl Sunnah, from the Sunnah, who made a statement. It was Khomeini.
Yes.
And you had the whole Muslim world, the majority of the Muslim world following and saying, yes, kill Salman Rushdie. Khomeini had said such and such and everything. And this was, I wasn't Muslim at that time, but as I became Muslim and learned the issues, I was thinking, wow, this shows how galvanization on an emotive perspective, on a perspective of ignorance, is very dangerous in itself.
There's the whole thing right there.
So
I just want to chime in. As you said, that illustrates the ignorance of a lot of people in that regard. Okay. At the same time, even those other issues, as you mentioned, pulling people into camps, it's amazing to me that somebody who's a real talib al-ilm and has studied those masail and studied about fatwas and how making fatwas and ijtihadat, all these major issues about giving fatwa and, striving and to gain a jurisprudent ruling and so forth, would really say that. And force you to say, I could see at a beginning stage of talab, but some of those brothers are graduates and they should know better. They should know better that, there's whole books written about taghayyur al-fatwa, changing a fatwa, or that fatwa should be in the context of the society. And if they go to those scholars, major scholars in Saudi Arabia and less than them, or wherever in Yemen or whatever, they'll tell you, no, the context is very important. The context are, how many times have I sat with different mashayikh and they talk about, they say, well, yeah, and you guys in New York, and they might make a joke and this and that and the other. And they'll say, you guys, it's like this, but in our society, no, we couldn't do this because it would be a big aib or something. It would be a big, humiliating thing, but your society is different. And so it's very important to contextualize these issues and not, as you said, import them. But that does not reflect Salafiyya at all. That reflects the ignorance of some people who claim Salafi, and they may be Salafi, but they're just ignorant in that issue. Because how in the world could you transport? And I say, well, yeah, I lived in Saudi Arabia so many years, so everything I say is Saudi Arabia. No, or is whatever's going on. No, my scholar, my sheikhs in Saudi, I will ask them for knowledge and what have you. But I know there's no jurisdiction over me as far as what I have to do in my day-to-day living here in America, and the issues that I face, but I will ask them if I don't know something. Okay. And this is a
very excellent point, Khalid. I think this is, as we're wrapping up this particular episode, this is so important, because it's been through this door that we've seen the problems prevalent amongst Salafiyya for most of the last 30 years.
Yeah.
And maybe in the early cognitive stages of our own development, but I'd say
largely, of course,
we had
we're
that
part
understanding.
Of it. Yeah.
And we were a part of that. We contributed to that. But now I think what you've said here, what we're discussing here, is so important. And I hope that the observers, the participants, take this away with them, that what you've said, that is not Salafiyya. What you've described it, the people who are doing it may be Salafi, but it's not Salafiyya. And you've got those who are professing to be, and they're not student of knowledge because they haven't studied in the same way as these brothers, who are now calling themselves sheikhs, that what they're adhering to and holding to be a balance. It's not. It's a hybridization. It's what I would say, a word that I always use. It's a bastardization of elements of Salafiyya. Which is not actually from the door of Salafiyya in its instance. And so that's why there is such an imbalance when you look at what is emanating from these particular individuals, these particular entities in that instance. And even some of our brothers who may not belong to any particular entity, but they're speaking with this voice, with this Yemen-centric, Saudi-centric, whatever country-centric voice and saying that this is the reality as we live and exist within the West. The Strictly YouTube saying we need to start discussing our future of moving from the womb. Yes, very, very true. And this is Strictly YouTube, what I speak about in the cognitive development stages when we move to the latter two stages of that actualization and contextualization of the knowledge. And as one mentioned before, having the wisdom of when to apply and not to apply according to the understanding of the deen that we have at that particular time. So maintaining a balance. One thing we've got to remember is that maintaining a balance is not the easiest of the three positions. That might sound strange. What do I mean here by that, Khalid? I'm going to bring something from deen. So we know progressiveness, liberal extremism is very easy to run away with, like a runaway train. If you want to assimilate and you want validation from the society that you're in, it's the easy thing to do, okay? Violent extremism, terrorism, Kharijite ideology is also a very easy thing to move along because it's primarily emotive and based on ignorance. Whereas maintaining a balance, and I'm going to bring one narration and ask you to elucidate upon that as we draw to a conclusion. Maintaining a balance is the most difficult, even though it's among the clearest and widest spectrums to traverse. The Sirat al-Mustaqim is the widest and most secure to traverse, but we are in a time where we've been told that holding on to your deen is like holding on to hot coals, burning coals. That's why I say maintaining a balance is difficult in these days, because it's like the hadith says, holding on to hot coals. And also we know from the hadith of the Rawaybidah that the time will come when the truthful person will be called the liar, and the liar will be seen as the truthful one, and that the Rawaybidah will be speaking from both sides of the spectrum. And the Prophet ﷺ was asked, who are the Rawaybidah? And he said, the lowly, ignoble person who speaks out about public affairs. So again, I'll conclude on this point for you to take over in this instance. Maintaining a balance in these times is like holding on to hot coals. It is difficult. The other two polarizations are very easy to do. And the way we maintain the balance is knowledge of the deen, asking the scholars when we don't know, and bringing that into the context of our own environment and adhering to it as much as we can.
Every time I was thinking to chime in, you've already said what I was going to say. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserve you. Yeah, I think as you said, it's knowledge. You know, it's knowledge, and it's being adherent to your religion, and that means avoiding the two paths of evil, the shahwat and shubahat, the desires. Because that's another way the shaitan can get you from following your desires, you know, falling into different sins, whether it's music, whether it's pornography, whether it's whatever. That's through your desires. Or the shubahat, the doubtful issues, you know, and that goes into, as you mentioned, the hadith about the Ruwaybidah and so forth, that this is, you know, getting into doubtful issues, bringing up doubtful issues, bringing up strange opinions, debating and arguing about things you may not even have much knowledge about, and just bringing up controversy just to make discord. So, you know, it's those two ways the shaitan can deceive us. And so we have to be very cautious about, you know, and to tread that middle path means staying adherent. Look at how many people are attacking the methodology of the Salaf right now. Right now, it seems like it's a hot item right now. There's a major backlash, as I spoke about in some of our other podcasts. There's a major backlash. So it's a time to even be more vigilant, not out of arrogance, but more vigilant in understanding the da'wah to Ahl Sunnah, you know, the call, the propagation, the methodology of the Salaf of this Ummah, those first three generations. How did the Sahaba look at the religion? And adhering, as the Prophet ﷺ said, he said, you know, Adu alayha bin nawajid, you know, adhere to it, cling to my sunnah with your molar teeth, and your molar teeth are in the back of your mouth here. So that means your mouth is clinging right there to his sunnah, and the sunnah of the Khulafa Rashidin al-Mahdin, and the sunnah of the rightly guided Khulafa Rashidin. So as you said, it's a hot coal. Your Islam, holding on to the Sunnah, holding on to Islam. But the only way you're going to be able to hold to Islam and the Sunnah of the Khulafa al-Rashidin al-Mahdiin is through knowledge, Islamic knowledge. That's why we all have to try to devote some time in our lives to learning our correct understanding of Islam and practicing. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us guidance. Ameen.
Ameen. And Jazakallah khair. I think that to conclude, I think
the reality of fitna is so intense. Yeah.
Yeah.
May Allah bless
this is such an important note. This is such an important note to conclude on how we maintain a balance. And when we look today, and our participants and viewers are looking today, and we see how misguided many of us are among the ummah. And one of the key reasons is that lack of knowledge and seeking of knowledge. And it's that, and having that patience with the knowledge. It was only 30 years ago, 25 years ago, I remember we used to rush and sit at the feet of the visiting scholars. And we would sit for hours. We'd stand up, get the cramp out of our feet, go for refreshment, pray, come back, and we'd sit with pen and paper. And I'm not a student of knowledge in that instance, in that sense of the words. They were coming for conferences and we were sitting. We are a generation, or we're amongst the time where, mashallah, those who are listening and spending an hour on these shows, and may Allah bless you, because not many have the time and stamina to do that. And we are not scholars in the academic sense, mashallah, tabarakallah. I mean, in the Islamic sense, from Western academia, some would consider with the PhDs, yes. But we're talking about the religious sense now. The sitting with the scholars, learning, structural knowledge is something that people have become bored with. And I'm going to say that, bored with, impatient and tired with. It's clickbait, it's edutainment. And if we keep moving in this pathway, this trajectory, we are going to have a problem with regards to holding on and maintaining a balance, inshallah. And I want to end on that note with Dr. Khalid. If you've got anything else you want to offer, you've dropped some gems as usual in this particular show, mashallah, tabarakallah, wayak. And if you've got anything to add, I'll let you add, and we can then close off the show for this evening, inshallah.
I don't really have anything else to add. Jazakallah khairan. May Allah reward you. Allah yabarak.
Wayak, and you as well, and our audience, may Allah bless you for your patience and your regularity in attending these and other shows of Newcastle Fast FM. We look forward to seeing you in a fortnight on this particular show. I may see some of you tomorrow night and on Monday night in the shows that are coming, inshallah. And you will obviously see Dr. Khalid on his regular YouTube postings. You'll see the 10-minute, 15-minute, 20-minute gems that he occasionally drops, mashallah. And we look forward to seeing you again. Jazakumullah khair. Wayak, Persia Saeed. Wa alaikum salam li. And we'll speak to you and see you all again soon. Shama, Wayak, thank you for being regulars with us. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.